Hi, I'm Nick Holland and welcome to the House of Bronte. I'm a Bronte blogger, I'm a Bronte fan, I'm a Bronte biographer. I've written two Bronte biographies about Anne Brontë, In Search of Anne Brontë and Crave the Rose, Anne Brontë at 200. So I'm a huge fan of Anne Brontë. That's why in today's House of Bronte episode we're going to say happy birthday Anne Brontë. So why do I love Anne Brontë so much? That's what we're going to look at today, and you might share the same feelings, the same reasons. Well, first of all, Anne Brontë changed my life. I've been doing a series of jobs in marketing, communications, but I was reading a lot. I was reading a lot about the Brontes. I'd read lots of books on the Bronte family, and I wanted to read another book on Anne Brontë. This was about 2015, and I couldn't find one I hadn't read, so I thought, why not write one yourself? You know a lot about her, you can research her and find out even more, and maybe people will be interested in what you have to say. And they were. And that led to my first book, In Search of Anne Brontë, which the Mail on Sunday picked up, made it their book of the week, and that really launched my career as a biographer, as a writer. And it's completely changed my life. And I think people liked this book. It resonated with people because they could tell it was from the heart. I really love the Bronte sisters. I love the Bronte books, and I'm really passionate about Anne Brontë. So let's share the reasons why. Well, she was the sixth. She was the youngest of the Bronte siblings, and out of three Bronte siblings who wrote, three Bronte sisters, Charlotte Bronte, Emily Bronte, Anne Brontë. Anne was the youngest, and she's still to this day, I think, not getting fully the credit she deserves. I think as a writer, Anne's work is right up there, in the Premier League of English literature from the 19th century, equal to the books of Charlotte Bronte, to the book of Emily Bronte. Anne's two novels deserve to be counted at the same stratospheric level. And I'm pleased to say that Anne is getting a lot more attention now. Her books are getting a lot more attention, and people are discovering her work today, and they're saying, wow, this is great. And I agree. So that's one reason why I like Anne Brontë so much. She's the underdog. I always like to support the underdog. And you might too. She's the Bronte sisters' underdog, but she's getting some credit now. And also she was a very kind person. We know that comes out in her books, definitely. But we know people describing her, people who knew her, people like Ellen Nussey, who was Charlotte Bronte's best friend but knew the whole family. She absolutely loved Anne Brontë. And Charlotte Bronte called her the darling of my heart. Everybody who knew Anne found her a very shy woman. All the Bronte sisters were shy. Rather small woman, very shy woman, but a fiercely intelligent woman. She really excelled in all her studies. She could read Greek, she could read Latin. She was a biblical scholar. She was a very religious woman. She's a biblical scholar. She wrote hymns. And she could survive, even though she was very shy, she could survive really in the outside world. Charlotte and Emily loved the world of the imagination. The world of everyday life didn't appeal to them as much, so they didn't hold down jobs for long periods of time. Anne Brontë was a governess, two stints as a governess, but in her longest stint to the Robinson family of Thorpe Green near York. She was there for over 5 years, and her children, the Robinson children, valued her so much they bought her a spaniel, Flossie, who Anne became very close to. So that shows the regard they have. And even after Anne Brontë left that role and stopped being their governess, they travelled over to Haworth in winter through the snow from Derbyshire, where they were living. A couple of them came over to talk to Anne. They wanted to talk to her. They still valued what she had to say, and they still loved her as a person. And that's a great tribute, I think, to Anne Brontë as a person, as a human being. I know we see her books today, but 200 years ago, Anne Brontë was wandering around Haworth. So she was a real person, we need to remember, and she was a good person. She was a good artist. All the Brontes were talented painters, but she's left some fine paintings and illustrations behind, I think. Paintings like What You Please, showing a woman in a woodland scene. I think it's a self-portrait of Anne. Sunset over sea, or sunrise over sea, sorry, it could be a sunset, but sunrise over sea, a woman looking out to the sea. Quite a symbolic painting. And again, I think, we only see the back of her. I think it's another self-portrait by Anne Brontë. So she left us 2 novels. Emily Bronte, her older sister, who was very close to Anne Eleanor, she said they were like twins. They used to walk around the house, arms entwined with each other. They had twin-like sentiment, really. And they made up an imaginary kingdom gondol together. Anne and Emily were always very close, probably the closest of all the Bronte siblings. But Anne left 2 novels, lots of poetry as well, a fine poet. 2 novels. The first one was Agnes Grey, which was published alongside Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte, and then she wrote The Tenant of Wildfell Hall. Agnes Grey is often overshadowed by The Tenant. It's a smaller book, but I think it's a wonderful book. I think it's the most underrated novel ever written, in my opinion. And it's largely, I think, or at least partly, autobiographical. It deals with a governess, Agnes, who really, I think, is a bit of a facsimile of Anne, who was a governess. Agnes is a governess in 2 positions, like Anne was, and she really takes aim at her former employers and her former pupils that she encountered, especially when she was a governess at Blake Hall at Mirfield, which is an unhappy, difficult time for her, and she really puts down the experiences on paper. We know in real life Anne was sacked from that position when her very unruly children, she tied them to table legs, and she was reading or writing poetry when the mother came in and found her and sacked her. And we know that from the daughter of one of her pupils who was tied to a chair or to a table leg. So yeah, Anne didn't like that position too much, but her second position, as we said, in Thorpe Green, even though it had challenges for her, especially when she got her brother Branwell a job there, but she excelled at it, really. She showed that she could really be a really good governess, a really good teacher, and people valued what she did and what she had to say. So Agnes Grey looks at those 2 governess positions, and I think it deals with her love, her lost love as well. I think, we'll look at this in another video, I think Anne Brontë loved William Waitman, who was her father's assistant curate. Waitman died young, so she never got to fulfil that love affair. They never got married, which they could possibly have done. It would have been completely natural for an assistant curate to marry the daughter of his vicar, his curate. But, cholera took Waitman away far too young. But I think Anne recreates herself as Agnes and recreates Waitman as Weston, and gives herself in print the happy ending that life had denied her. And I think that's very moving. So I'm reading an excerpt from In Search of Anne Brontë, but it's an excerpt from Agnes Grey, the closing. So spoiler alert, Weston's taken Agnes to a cliff top where a castle is. It's in Scarborough, really, even though it's not named. And he says, Weston says, "My house is desolate yet, Miss Grey, and I am now acquainted with all the ladies in my parish, and several in this town too, and many others I know by sight and report, but not one of them will suit me for a companion. In fact, there is only one person in the world that will, and that is yourself. And I want to know your decision." And I think it's moving. I think it's such an understated proposal, such an understated scene, and such a lovely scene. It's so heartfelt, so romantic. And it still moved me. It moved me every time I read that. So Anne was a brilliant wordsmith. and she's been recognised as that today. Now, she was recognised by a lot of people later in the 19th century, early 20th century. George Moore, who was an Irish writer, a very fine writer and critic, a massive fan of Anne Brontë, and he said if Anne had lived 5 years longer, she'd have taken a position alongside Jane Austen, maybe even higher than Jane Austen in the annals of English literature. So that's some praise from a great writer himself. So, excuse me. So, having written the first book, Anne decided to write another book, very different book, The Tenant of Wildfell Hall. And it's such a revolutionary book, so relevant even today. And she shone a spotlight on the ugly sides of society, of marriage, of relationships. And it's about an abusive relationship, a woman who flees an abusive relationship, takes her son with her and leaves her husband in days when you couldn't really get divorces. So it was a really revolutionary book, and people were absolutely shocked, but also people absolutely loved the book. It sold very quickly in very big numbers initially. And a second edition came out, and Anne Brontë took aim at some of the critics. The critics had said it's an ungodly book. You know, a woman shouldn't leave her husband. Characters can't be this vicious. People shouldn't have to read about these characters, about abuse in marriages, about drug addiction and drink addiction and violence, all of which are in The Tenant. And Anne Brontë wrote a preface to a second edition and really took aim at people who had criticised her. And Anne said, "Be it understood, I shall not limit my ambition to this, giving innocent pleasure, or even to producing a perfect work of art." She's put that in exclamation marks. "Or even to producing a perfect work of art. Time and talent so spent, I should consider wasted and misapplied. Such humble talents as God has given me, I will endeavour to put to their greatest use. If I am able to amuse, I will try to benefit too. And when I feel it is my duty to speak an unpalatable truth, with the help of God I will speak it, though it be to the detriment of my readers' immediate pleasure, as well as my own. But when we have to deal with vice and vicious characters, I maintain it is better to depict them as they really are than as they would wish to appear. To represent a bad thing in its least offensive light is doubtless the most agreeable course for a writer of fiction to pursue. But is it the most honest, or the safest? Is it better to reveal the snares and pitfalls of life to the young and thoughtless traveller, by which she means young readers, or to cover them with branches and flowers? O reader, if there were less of this delicate concealment of facts, this whispering of peace, peace, when there is no peace, there would be less of sin and misery to the young of both sexes, who are left to wring their bitter knowledge from experience." And in that same preface, Anne, who was writing under the pseudonym of Acton Bell, writing under a male pseudonym, goes on to address what some critics had said, could this be a woman writing it? And she said, it doesn't matter if it's a woman or a man writing it. I think a good book is a good book that should be read by men and women. And I don't see why a woman should be censored for writing a book that a man could write. And I don't see why a man should write a book that couldn't be read by a woman. So it's really revolutionary writing. And Anne didn't bow down before criticism. She stood up to it and she fought back and she said, "I'm going to do what I want to do, what I feel I need to do." And that's one reason why The Tenant of Wildfell Hall is such a powerful book today and so relevant today. And I think if you want to know about 19th century literature, you absolutely have to read The Tenant of Wildfell Hall by Anne Brontë, and you'll enjoy it too. It's a fantastic novel. So Anne Brontë was a wonderful woman, great artist, great poet, great sibling, great novelist. So what else can we say? Anne Brontë was great. So one more thing we can say, subscribe to my channel if you like it, like this post, if you like it, there'll be lots more coming from the House of Bronte. But the one more thing I have to say is happy 206th birthday, Anne Brontë, born today, 17th of January in 1820 in Thornton, Bradford. Happy birthday, Anne Brontë.